All right, today we're going to dive into crypto regulation, what the landscape might look like, especially in the current times with ETFs looming, with all the things we're seeing, especially in the House here recently with the new speaker. All of this needs to be broken down, I think, by some experts in the industry that I think are going to be very interesting to listen in on. So you don't want to miss this one. My name is Paul Barron. Welcome back into Tech Path. All right, joining me today is Faryar Shirzad, who is the Chief Policy Officer at Coinbase, leading companies' engagement with policymakers around the world. So Faryar, welcome to the show. Thanks for stopping in.
No, thanks, Paul. Thanks for having me on.
Let's get into a couple of topics here. And I want to go into tokenized assets and what that is going to look like, especially from a regulatory framework. I was just looking at, a post here by Circle. And this was really about how tokenized assets are going to make their way onto in combination with USDC and what's happening with Circle. When you look at the framework of regulation now, obviously we're already struggling, I think, with just general regulation. What are your thoughts on how, especially around tokenized securities, how this will make its way through the ranks of the House and the Senate coming up hopefully in the next year or two?
Well, the way you frame the question is actually really important. There's a broader momentum moving towards the tokenization of a full range of assets, so financial instruments, but also real-world assets as well. And all you have to do is take a step back, and you'll see it. I was down in Brazil last week meeting with officials there, including at the central bank, and they have a really clear vision of pervasive tokenization across the economy. And they see their role as the central bank as to use regulation and government measures, including bank regulation, bond issuance, and the like, to catalyze the process of tokenization. In the US, we're taking more incremental steps, starting with what you alluded to, which is federal legislation around the regulation of crypto intermediaries. Now, obviously, in the US, that's a hugely important step, and one that we at Coinbase are spending enormous amounts of time to get right. But one of the things I try to do, and I know a lot of my colleagues try to do as well, is we try to make sure that we all remember that the end goal is not the regulation of crypto intermediaries like Coinbase, although that's a really important step. The ultimate end goal is to make sure that the U.S. has the right policy environment for tokenization across the board. It's going to happen. We're in a bit of a period of turbulence as the first big breakthrough legislation potentially gets through. But there's a bigger vision, much beyond the regulation of central intermediaries, that's ultimately in front of all of us as a society.
For sure. And we're going to get into some of that, I think, just in the future of the United States, especially around innovation and just in general, I think, even national security. And we'll talk about that here in a moment. But I want to stay on the focus of where the growth of the industry is starting to, for the first time, I think, I've been following this for several years, and now it feels like DC is actually paying attention to what's happening, which is great. Whether or not we get a full reign of understanding is still questionable. I want to jump to one of your colleagues, Paul Graywell. Of course, there are oral arguments coming out here in the motion for judgment now being set for early January. This is the big Coinbase case that could be another loss for the SEC. When you look at it from a policy guy side and you think, wow, all of these losses are piling up against the SEC. We've already seen continuous situations roll out all the way from Ripple and many others. What does that do to the policymakers? You're out there talking with these guys all the time. Are they watching this and kind of understanding really what's happening in the courts?
Oh, absolutely. And the observation actually goes both ways. I think the courts are typically will take notice when Congress is stepping in to provide guidance or clarity around an area of legal uncertainty, and courts become respectful and deferential to what they see in terms of congressional action. But to your question, Congress also pays attention to what the courts do when they're struggling with an issue that ultimately requires resolution by the political branches. In this particular context of digital assets, you've had the SEC chair saying multiple times that, well, he actually initially started saying he needed legislation to regulate crypto assets. And then after 8, 9, 10 months or so, he flipped and he said, no, he had all the authority he needed. And now we've had about a year and a half of the courts and all of us who've engaged with the SEC testing out that new version of the legal framework that he says he has in terms of having all the authority he needs, and having three cases in the district courts go against the fundamental theory of that he's put forward in terms of regulating the crypto markets, and then having another one, the finding his decision making with regard to, in the case of Grayscale on another crypto matter, was arbitrary and capricious. Lawmakers know that. They watch it, they see it quite closely, and they understand that it raises real questions that the courts are being forced to try to deal with, but also fundamental questions regarding the strength of the SEC's theory in terms of how they intend to try to exercise oversight over the space. And that's, I think, helpful in moving legislation forward, which we're excited about.
So just for our viewers and listeners, understanding, you spent some time at Goldman Sachs as their global policy lead. You look at it from, and that's being traditional finance. Now you're on this side of the fence in the sense of what I think will eventually be qualified as traditional finance as well. But the point being is that, do you feel that this industry, how big of a hill do you think we have to really climb? You've seen it from the TradFi side. Now you're seeing it from this side of the fence. Is this something that is insurmountable? Is it something that you feel is going to happen in the next couple of years? What's your feeling of what you've seen? You've worked with these people on both sides now.
Well, what I would say is our glass is way more than half full. When you're in crypto, particularly for people who are around it for a long time, there's a lot of reasons to be down in the dumps, particularly if you're in the United States and you see some of the behavior out of the regulatory agencies that just seems kind of beyond any fair kind of application of law. But I always try to remind myself to take a few steps back. One, to remind myself that 83% of the G20 countries have or are in the midst of implementing sensible crypto regulation. Now, we as an industry like some parts of it, we don't like other parts of it. But generally speaking, the entire rest of the developed economies are all moving forward to adopt crypto and embrace it through their regulatory systems. That's an example that the U.S. cannot ignore for much longer and will drive U.S. policymaking at some point. Maybe not quite yet, but it'll happen sooner than you think. The other thing is that there's a handful of crypto critics. Now, Elizabeth Warren, Gary Gensler, a few of the regulators that Warren has a lot of influence over, who are being very tough on crypto. But, I deal with members of Congress in the House and the Senate, we are lucky in crypto not to be like almost every other issue in Washington, which is partisan and tribal. We have a lot of allies who are Democrats, and we have a lot of allies who are Republican, and we have lots and lots of members who just are beginning their crypto journeys, beginning to figure out how to pay attention to this. So our starting point is much, much better than a lot of other industries have. In traditional finance, you can't barely take a half a step one way or the other without triggering kind of old battle lines that have nothing to do with the merits of the issue on the table, but just have to do with certain political camps in Washington are against the banks. And if the banks, advocate for declaring that the sky is blue, they'll be against that. And we don't have that in crypto as much as we feel that we're picked on at times. We're in a much, much better position. And the onus is really on us to kind of pick ourselves up, go into every member of Congress and every other policymaker and make our case. And I think when we do that effectively, we change minds and win hearts and win allies. And I feel very good about that.
Okay, so there's really kind of two major factions that are not only injecting change right now, but also could be part of the future in a way, whether you're a pro, personal finance, or you love the idea of anonymity in crypto, or the idea of freedom of being your own bank. All those kind of things can work. But now this time around, in terms of this cycle, we'll call it, we're seeing the first real introduction of institutional capital. And not only that, we're also seeing the introduction of traditional finance, meaning big banks. You look at obviously what's happening with Fidelity, but then you bring in all these ETFs coming in from BlackRock, et cetera, along with a lot more funds. You look at all that and you consider, all right, this is kind of the realization of where crypto is going. I was just looking at this tweet right here. This kind of brings my question home from Balshunas over here at Bloomberg. And he was breaking this down by interest level from millennials. This even surprised me in the terms of where millennials were interested in terms of investing. So ETFs there, which most likely could start to see some movement, especially in the next year. How are lawmakers, because this is all the voting bloc, I mean, really coming at them at full force. How are lawmakers really understanding the kind of movement that we're seeing both in TradFi now as well as the world of crypto?
Well, lawmakers hear about this everywhere. I mean, they hear it among their staff, who are often maybe 2 or 3 steps ahead of them on crypto adoption. They hear it at home among family members, sometimes their kids who are on the front end of crypto adoption. We've done polling on this. There's about 52 million Americans who have bought crypto. That's more people than have union cards, more people than have electric vehicles. We're not a niche issue. We're mainstream in terms of the breadth of interest in crypto. And this is still at the first or second inning of crypto's adoption. And now, as you said, we have institutional interest coming in. And so crypto will, I think, better be seen, as it should, as a technology that powers the democratization of a lot of applications. And there'll be a lot of different entry points that people will want to come into crypto. So for sure, we've all seen the retail token trading, the exuberance of the markets when they seemed like there was no way but up, and people got into it, and obviously the market crashed down. But this is typical of the early stages of development of any financial asset. And now you've got institutional interest, you've got these ETF applications, of course, but you have other institutional entry points that people are looking at. And I think this will begin to demystify this industry and show that there's a very comfortable diversity of options that people have, regulated and unregulated, to enter the crypto sphere. And our job is to have these use cases become demystified in the eyes of policymakers so that they embrace the full panoply. I mean, one of the risks of institutional adoption of crypto is that it almost makes some policymakers who aren't paying a lot of attention to this think that you no longer need decentralized solutions or smart contracts. And I think that's the point I was trying to make a second ago, which is you want to be able to have the full diversity of the crypto toolkit available from a public policy perspective. And that's why you'll find Coinbase active on DeFi issues, on smart contracts issues, on mixer issues, on institutional derivatives offerings, on being a part of the solution that ETF applicants are providing to the SEC, because we want that whole scope of what crypto can do to be in front of both the markets and policymakers.
So good news is that, obviously the policymakers are starting to get enough of signal from not only, the markets, but also people that are really understanding where this future is going. Now you get into the real policymakers that make sense. This, of course, was Tom Emper steps away, obviously, as speaker. This would have been our dream crypto guy, I feel like anyway. It would have been one of the top ones I would have selected. But at the same time, now we've got Mike Johnson in here. So Mike Johnson, not necessarily heavily experienced in the essence of as a speaker, obviously now, but as a lawmaker in general. How big of an impact is this on the crypto community now? I know we've got Patrick McHenry kind of out there leading the charge. You still have a lot of pro-crypto, pro-blockchain innovation lawmakers. Will this make much of a difference with Johnson now in the lead as speaker?
Well, the speaker has a lot of issues on his plate, or Nancy Pelosi did when she was speaker as well. And so, even however pro-crypto a particular speaker may be, they still need to get the budget done. They need to get appropriations bills through. They need to get the, whole range of things that they have to do just as a matter of their constitutional responsibility. So Mike Johnson doesn't have a track record on crypto, but I'm confident, given the allies that we have, committee chairs and senior members of the Republican caucus, that we're going to be in a very good spot with this new leadership. The thing that I do pay attention to is the speaker election process that the Republicans went through has delayed the timing of when the FIT 21 bill potentially would come to the floor. And I think that's a more immediate issue. So we've been lucky that the politics, I don't think, have shifted much, and our Democratic allies are with us, notwithstanding a lot of the fireworks that you saw in the context of the speaker sort of drama. But the more tangible thing that I pay a lot of attention to is just the timing issue. How far back have we been pushed on the calendar? Do we have time to get Fit 21 up on the floor? And how are we going to use that time most effectively to win allies, get people to come onto the bill, and get a good vote ultimately out of the House?
So obviously with that, Faryar, we've got the stablecoin regulation also coming into the House and potentially going through. With that statement that you just made, if we miss this window, what does it look like, from a landscape standpoint into next year? When could we see possibly regulation come back to the forefront?
Well, in terms of legislation, I think I would say the thing about legislation, having done it for many, many years, is you never know. And I always find I talk to people who analyze the landscape and tell me with great confidence that it's hard to pass legislation this year, next year is a better year, and so on. And at a certain level, that may or may not be true. But in a way, legislation is more about maximizing what you can control and not worrying about the stuff that you can't control. And so, yes, in principle, next year's an election year. The speaker delayed things. Things are pushed back. As you get closer to the election, things get slower and slower. And there's 100 sort of factors of that sort to think about, and why 25 might be better than 2024 and so on. But I can't control any of that. All I can control is making sure my Coinbase team and all the industry partners and trade associations that we work with are not for 1/2 a second taking their foot off the gas pedal, and not using every minute available to us to go in and talk to every member in the House, Republican, Democrat, progressive left, conservative right, and making the case for crypto, and then simultaneously turning over every rock in the home districts of members who we don't have on our side yet, and finding constituents who are here and bringing them into the debate as well. And that's part of the reason why we started the StandWithCrypto.org organization, is to get that grassroots dimension into the mix. And once you think of it in that way, there's a lot we can control. And today is a great day to move legislation, and the leadership will ultimately decide when it goes on the floor. But we're going to make the conditions as strong as possible, so when they make that decision, we have as many allies as possible to get the bill through with bipartisan support.
A couple of things I want to hit on here, because we've already seen the idea of what choke point was. Now what we're starting to see is other aspects of we'll just say mainstream media starting to take jabs at crypto. This was just some recent hits on it. Of course, one of your colleagues, Paul Graywall, here hitting on the journalistic mistakes by the Wall Street Journal. This was in reference to potentially funding into terrorist groups. So the idea is kind of pathetic when people really understand blockchain, because this is the worst thing you can use out there. And then you've got Brian Armstrong, of course, your CEO. This is crazy, inaccurate, etc. This was, of course, they issued a correction to the data, and now we're starting to actually see, there was a hearing, I think, yesterday. We're actually starting to see data come out, from on-chain analysis. My question to you is, this is the Wall Street Journal. I mean, next it could be Axios, next it could be The Hill. I mean, there's just so many opportunities here for mainstream press to become a major hurdle, whether they don't understand it or there's other nefarious actions at work here. How are you guys planning to kind of fight that battle? Because I feel like that's one of the bigger battles that is waging right now.
Education, I think, is just engaging, meeting the reporters, and just like you would meet members of Congress where they are, regulators as well. Each of those audiences are a bit different in terms of how you approach them, but they're not different in the sense that fundamentally you just want to bring facts to the table, a narrative around why crypto matters, and then just be compelling in terms of speaking to them in a language that they understand. I mean, I would say on reporters, there were a lot of reporters that gave Gary Gensler a huge benefit of the doubt in terms of his theory of the case on how he intended to regulate the crypto markets. You've had 3 district courts now repudiate the core foundation of his theory of why the SEC should treat virtually every crypto token as a security. Now, these are 3 district court cases. And I suppose, our case might be the fourth one. We'll see ultimately where they all land, and there'll be appeals and this, that, and the other. But in the end of the day, even reporters who, at times you think, well, gee, I wish they would tell the story a bit differently, with time ultimately begin to see where the facts lay. And you'll see, I think, some of the reporting is becoming a little bit more thoughtful in terms of, asking the second and third question of the SEC. You see that in the courts. Typically, the SEC had huge deference in the courts in terms of decisions it would make. You see now the courts kind of saying, particularly the Grayscale case, where the court did a complete comprehensive assessment of any basis of argument that the SEC was relying on for denying the Grayscale application, and they repudiated every bit of it, which they didn't necessarily needed to do. But in the end, they found that the SEC's decision-making was arbitrary, capricious, and unlawful. That is on the outer edge of the worst thing that can happen to you as a person who's run an agency. And I ran an agency in an earlier administration. If I had a court finding my decision-making comprehensively to be arbitrary, capricious, unlawful, I would wonder if that was sort of the end of my career. And those sorts of things have huge import. As much as a particular regulator may try to brush it off and think it's just sort of information gathering, these things have impact, and I think they'll have impact on reporters, just like and impact reporting over the longer term. So I feel like we'll do fine. We just need to keep at it.
Keep the education coming. To your point, in reference to the regulatory scenario with the SEC, this was from Caitlin Long, and it was referencing Hester Pierce talking about the SEC reopening Howey just to kill crypto wasn't necessarily the SEC's best interest. And that's my point. I mean, now you've got Gensler up here, obviously aligned with Senator Warren. When do you feel like there's going to be just too much political baggage or weight on Gensler that will continue to see this pushback? Because, and I have 2 points of interest here. One is killing innovation, and the other is national security. Let's forget just the idea of what crypto is, but this is real. We've already seen it worldwide. When do you think that DC will finally say, okay, that enough's enough?
I don't know. I mean, I can't speak to Gensler's motivations specifically, but there are lots of political figures that we all see in the paper all the time or on the news who are solving for a very narrow purpose. You see it in the Congress, and they're solving for a particular constituency that they're appealing to, and whatever chaos ensues is somebody else's problem. It's not their problem. And again, I'm not speaking to Gensler in particular, but I think we've all learned that there are different members and different policymakers and different politicians who are just interested in speaking to one constituency. And if they don't speak to the rest of the country, it's just not really a concern. And I think whether Gensler is like that or not, whether he's solving exclusively for Elizabeth Warren and not for the public good, I don't know. But likely his term is up by the end of this coming year, and we'll see who's next. And in the meantime, do our best to stick up for ourselves in court, and we'll help members of Congress on both sides of the aisle who want to get sound crypto legislation done. And I feel like that's plenty for us to focus on.
Yeah, for sure. Faryar, let's say, okay, you have a chance. You're here on our channel, so you get a chance to talk to a lot of people. What are some of the things that business owners, investors in crypto, people who are just general, curious about what's happening in blockchain, what is the best thing they can do right now to kind of secure this future? Obviously, I'm going to show the Stand with Crypto page because we've pitched this quite a bit about calling your congressman, getting involved with your local community, letting people kind of know where you stand. But are there other steps that could be taken?
Yeah, no, I'm glad. I appreciate you putting that up. So I would encourage everybody to go to standwithcrypto.org. So standwithcrypto.org. Right when you get on your landing page, you will see these 3 images, and it's very cool functionality. You can click the phone icon, you can click the email icon, and it will put you right into calling your member of Congress. You just have to put in your address. They'll figure out who your member of Congress is. If you're doing an email, it will, through AI technology, essentially through a customized chat GPT functionality that we have, write a letter for you. You can guide the parameters, edit it if you want, and send it directly to your member of Congress. And if you do that, you would be surprised how huge an impact that has. I used to be a staffer on the Senate Finance Committee. I worked for the chairman, very powerful guy, very powerful committee. As a staffer, I had a relatively powerful position. But my boss was from Delaware. My chairman was from Delaware. And if somebody from Delaware called, even if they hadn't really thought through their position on whatever they were calling about, or even if it didn't have anything to do with my job, my goodness, I knew my boss insisted that I listen to them and hear them out and follow up as necessary. And this is so people in Delaware had a superpower over me when I was a staffer on the Senate Finance Committee working for a Delaware senator. And everyone out there who's listening to this, you have a superpower over your member of Congress, much more formidable than you ever imagined, much more powerful than a tweet, much more powerful than an op-ed. It's just simply to call your policymaker, and we give you talking points if you want to have help on that. You'll see on there, the standwithcrypto.org page has a link for this crazy IRS proposal that's out, and that is formidable as well. So I would encourage people to do that, and I appreciate you giving me a chance to alert people to that functionality that's available to them.
Last point, because I'm not sure a lot of people know what the IRS is trying to propose here. Explain that in a nutshell for our audience.
So the brokers, so traditional brokers, Fidelity, Schwab, are required to compile gain and loss information for tax reporting purposes. So this is what's known as a 1099 form that a lot of us get at the end of the year, and we use it to prepare our taxes. There's always been a question about when the IRS is going to require crypto brokers like Coinbase to similarly prepare 1099s. We've always expected and embraced the idea that we need to do that. We need to help our customers, with to have the information necessary to file their taxes. So we think this is ultimately a good thing. But the legislation did, which I was very involved in trying to curtail back, and now that the IRS has done, is go far beyond requiring intermediaries like Coinbase, brokers like Coinbase, to report the 1099 information. They basically said that there's a possibility that anybody in the value chain associated with a crypto transaction has similar reporting obligations. Now think about it, a validator, node operator. I mean, it's impossible to achieve this, and that every single transaction that you engage in crypto has to be reported. So if you buy a cup of coffee with a stable coin, that has to be reported to the IRS. It's the most insane mass surveillance proposal the government has put out in my memory. And a lot of it, frankly, I think stems from the fact that they just don't understand the technology enough, and they overreach thinking that maybe they could curtail it back. But it's crazy if it lands anywhere near where it is, and people need to hear from it. And the standwithcrypto.org interface that you had up a moment ago, we've had 13,000 people email, put comments into the IRS comment portal. 13,000 comments. That is in the major leagues of public input. We're hoping to double that or more, and it'll make an impact. And so you have, they just extended the deadline, I think, in part from the uproar that it created. And I think if we can get everybody else who's listening to this to do a similar thing, it would be formidable. So really cool opportunity.
We'll leave a link in the show notes, guys, and drop that into our newsletter as well when we post this out to you guys. So for everybody watching, Faryar, it's been great having you on the show today. Thanks so much for breaking all this down for us. We appreciate it.
Thanks, Paul. Thanks for having me on.
You bet. All right. So you guys are listening, maybe over on the podcast side of things, make sure and jump over here to the YouTube channel and, of course, subscribe. It's one of the better ways you're going to be able to, one, get some of this kind of alpha, but also kind of get an insight as to what you can do to kind of set the course for what the future of crypto is going to be. Because obviously, you guys, if you're watching us, you know how important that is. If you're not part of our Diamond Circle, make sure and get in on that as well. It's our free content that is additional to what we do here on the YouTube channel. It's very easy. Just click the link down below. If you want to hit me on X, it's at Paul Barron. We'll catch you next time right here on TechPath.